Hey guys, welcome back to JD Mods. Quickly before starting the video, I want to say that it is 45 degrees Celsius outside after the Humidex, and in Canada that is just unheard of. So if it looks like I'm sweating buckets during this video, that is why, and don't be surprised. So anyway, let's get started. So I wasn't expecting to do this video right now, but essentially I was driving my car just the other day in school a couple hours away. And basically I was leaving a parking lot, thankfully, and my exhaust, just one of the welds broke and it just fell off the whole center section. So I had to emergency hacksaw the exhaust in half until I could clamp it back on later. So right now the exhaust on my Civic is clamped on, but it is not ideal. So in today's video, we're gonna fix the exhaust. So the easiest way to fix an exhaust leak, whether it is a small leak, a rusted hole, maybe your muffler falls off, maybe your header cracked, really doesn't matter. The easiest way to fix it is to probably install a turbocharger. So no, it is not actually the easiest way to fix an exhaust, but basically the exhaust just broke, as I mentioned, in my Civic. And no point in fabbing up or welding my exhaust when I already have purchased a turbo kit. Now, as you can see here, I already have the manifold, the turbo, and the downpipe, which is in that box right there. So, first step, we're going to go ahead and jack up the car, take off the old exhaust. I'll show you how bad it is. And then we're going to install all these pieces, the oil lines, and then connect it all up. And hopefully that fixes our exhaust leak. And remember, if you guys aren't subscribed already, please be kind and smash that subscribe and bell icon button, because in the future we're going to teach you guys how to fix any air leak. So the first step, as you can see, I've jacked up my car and put it safely on blocks or jack stands. And now I'm going to start to go ahead and remove the stock header. I'm lucky enough to have an aftermarket header, which means it will probably not be all rusted on there. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my DC racing header and the downpipe portion of it, which, as you can see, is right in there. I'll show you guys the rusted out parts in a second, but there's my header going into the clamps, which is where the weld broke. There's my cat, and then there is the rest of the exhaust that will probably end up taking off too. So there's the header off the car. I decided to leave the whole cat and the exhaust going back from that on the car so I can easily fab up the turbo downpipe. Now the first step and the first thing we're going to go ahead and install here is the manifold, and it's easiest in my opinion to attach the wastegate to the manifold outside the car. Now let's go ahead and attach these 5 bolts, making sure to use the original gasket rather than the aftermarket perforated gasket. So go ahead and attach it using those 5 provided bolt holes, and then once it's on the car we can bolt the turbo to the manifold. So there you can see I've installed my turbo manifold. It is just 5 bolts. This is a log style manifold, so it puts it at the rear of the motor, and the only bolt I had troubles with is the one in the center of the screen down there. I had to replace the stud with a longer one than stock, and then cut down a bolt and use a washer so that it fits inside that little bevel. Then the rest of the bolts and studs I used are stock size, so that is very good. Of course, if you have a Sidewinder turbo setup, it'll put the flange and turbo right over here in this big open spot in your engine bay. So if you have the funds, I highly recommend a Sidewinder. I got a great deal on this kit with Ali's Motor, so I'm going to be doing the log manifold obviously, and let's hope it fits. So let's go ahead and install the turbo. So next up we're going to be installing the turbo. And before I install the turbo, I made sure to put on the oil drain line and a gasket, as it's much easier to do outside the car than when it's mounted on your engine. So there you can see I've got the half of the turbo mounted. So basically what I did was I took off this vacuum hardline piece. It just bolts onto your motor right there. That got a bit of room. I took off the breather hose, the intake of course, unclipped a few sensors so that the wiring harness can easily move around, and a vacuum line off your brake booster. And what that allowed me to do was put the turbine and half of the compressor inside the back of the engine there. It is fully bolted down onto the flange. I of course used some lock washers and nuts. I used studs instead of bolts for that setup. And basically I also unclipped the wiring harness going to my car. It usually just clips onto those connectors right in the light there. So I unbolted mine so that I can later zip tie it higher away from the hot turbo. And lastly, I added some heat tape. I like to use this titanium exhaust wrap. And what I did was wrap the 2 heater core lines way back behind the turbo there, and also the fuel line where the turbo is. And so basically the fuel line is the one that goes from the quick disconnect on your firewall, and you follow it, it goes right into your fuel rail. So the heat tape will prevent any coolant leaks and fuel burn in the lines, so hopefully prevent any fires or future issues. So now I'm going to try my best and attach the front half of the turbo, of course remembering to install your gasket on the compressor so you don't have any air leaks, and also you want to clock it the way you like it. I see half these turbo kits have it clocked like this, and then they run the intercooler down and under, or the other half is easier but doesn't look as nice. I could clock it like this if you could picture that, and then just run the charge piping up and over the top of the entire engine bay. So I'm going to see what works best for me and do that right now. I've installed the front of the turbo and zip tied the electrical harness out of the way. As you can see, I decided to clock it with the outward pipe in the down position just because I think it looks so much cleaner. Now what I went ahead and did was just lightly bolted on the downpipe. As you can see, it is just an experimental downpipe. The tacks are still all, the welds are still all tacks. And then essentially, this is just a downpipe, so it just goes straight down pretty much. And right above my cross member, it just, let me see if I can show you guys. Let me get in there and show you guys close. So here we are underneath the car. That is my turbo up there. There's the oil drain line, and there's my downpipe. So it basically just comes down almost hitting the subframe. I might have to chop it a little shorter, but basically the next job is going to be a little bit of custom fabrication. We have to make that pipe go over my subframe and connect up to the 2.5-inch cat right there. Then we can fully weld it all together. And I'm gonna have to wrap the downpipe in heat tape as it gets really close to my brake lines. Hey guys, so we're back under the car. As you can see, I have fabbed up a kind of maybe temporary, if it works, potentially permanent exhaust. I got a 2.5-inch extension going from the cat, kind of just right here to my subframe, and then slipped in there is a 90-degree right there. And the 90-degree goes up on an angle and connects to the downpipe. Let me get a good angle for you guys. There it is, connects up to the downpipe, and that goes straight up there to the turbo. There's a good angle of the downpipe turbo setup. As you can see, there's the turbo going to the downpipe, going to the 90-degree pipe, straight back into the cat. So now what I did is just got it exactly where I wanted it, positioned some jack stands. Now I'm going to break out my little welder and see what I can do. Here's the welder I'm using. This is just a Mastercraft little welder. I'm going to see if it can get me enough penetration to not break all my welds. I've got it loaded up with some flux core wire as I don't have any MIG gas right now. So hopefully this has enough penetration and holding strength. If not, I can also use some clamps potentially. And I'll show you guys once I'm done welding and see if it looks very nice. So now that I have tacked it inside the car, I was actually successful in taking the downpipe out of the car. There it is, the turbo to the cat pretty much. So there's my tacks. No, my welding's not beautiful, but it's kind of an emergency and it will work, at least for the time being. I could also use a clamp if I'm worried about it falling apart, but I really am not. So I'm going to go ahead and weld this piece outside my car, as well as I dropped the cat piece. As you can see, it's sitting much lower, so I can get all the way around that weld there. So I'm going to go ahead and do all that. Then before I reassemble, I'll quickly show you guys the results. So there's my downpipe welded up. I'm not expecting to win any welding awards. For a second there, it did look decent. Like, if you zoom in right there, it looked decent, but then I decided to go for coverage and strength over looks, because what I'm going to be doing next is wrapping the whole thing in titanium exhaust heat wrap from there all the way down to here. I'm going to probably put in a O2 sensor weld or bung first, and then I'm going to be clamping on the tape, and then we're going to go ahead and reinstall the entire exhaust. Alright, so I just finished the downpipe. What I did was just wrapped it up in heat wrap tape to protect everything in my engine bay. I clamped on the heat wrap tape with some hose clamps and a metal zip tie right in the middle there, and then I also welded on a O2 sensor bung and screwed in a O2 sensor, as my old one broke when the exhaust fell down. And then I just took a file and made sure all my splatter was off of the flange for the mating surface. Now I'm going to go ahead and install the downpipe on my Civic. Now the last step, now that we're done exhaust, is to do the oil setup for your turbo. So I'm going to do the oil drain first, which requires removal of the oil pan. Now the problem with the K-series motor is that the oil pan cannot simply drop straight down, at least in an EP3 chassis anyway. So what I have to do is actually lift up the motor or drop the subframe, and I've chosen to lift up the motor. So to do that, you have to remove 3 engine mounts. Oh, there's a good shadow. So the first engine mount is right here. Just remove the stud. It's a 17mm nut, and then that'll allow this bracket to lift upwards. Now let me show you as best I can underneath the car here. The next engine mount is just at the front. You can see right up there. There's a bolt missing straight in the middle. That is the second mount, and the third mount is at the back of the motor. You can see the angle bracket, and there is 3 bolts on this one, 2 at the back and 1 in the front of the subframe. And then once all those bolts are out, there they are right over here. So there's the one from the first one, and then there is a long nut and bolt from the second one I showed you. Then here's the 3 bolts at the back. One's a super big one. 2 are small, they're 14mm heads. These are both 17mm heads. Then once that is done, what I did was just got a strap. This one's rated for 10,000 pounds. Hooked it up to a carabiner and a chain to my engine crane. And now what I'm going to do is lift up the engine crane, and then you can just remove all the bolts and take off the oil pan. Sorry about the shadows today. I wish it was a lot easier to see, but there is the motor lifted up. For reference, this crease on the intake used to be in line with the front T-support, so I probably jacked it up at the furthest point, obviously on the left, probably like 4 or 5 inches, without disconnecting a single thing other than the engine mounts. So let's go ahead and take a look at the oil pan. So here we are underneath the car. The oil pan basically is just held on with a lot of 10mm bolts that go around the entire circumference. And the one thing that you do have to do is remove the flywheel viewing cover, which is 3 10mm bolts, before you can access the ones in here. But now that we have lifted up the motor, you can see there's the subframe right here. And here's the oil pan. Before, I probably could not even fit my thumb in between the two. And now that distance there, once I take off the last 2 bolts, should just drop right out. And then we can add our drain line bung. So there's the oil pan off the car. This is actually my new oil pan. I was lucky enough to be able to snag this off of Ali's old Turbo K20 A3 setup. The K24 and the A3 share the same pan. They're both steel pans. The 24 is maybe a little bigger, but that's okay. This just means it'll have more floor clearance. Now, if you aren't able to just steal someone else's pan, what you want to do is either weld in like this one here, or there are clamp styles if you're cheap or don't have a welder. But basically you want to put it above the oil line. So as you can see from the side there, that's pretty much as close to the top as you want it, because you still have to be able to put the 10AN fitting over top of it. So just drill your hole, put it on, then weld it, or get someone else to weld it. This one here was TIG welded. If you are buying an eBay turbo kit like me, do not use the drain fitting from that kit as it is very cheap metal. Get yourself a nicer one and you won't regret it. You don't want to lose all your engine oil and blow out your engine. So as you can see, I've clearly scraped all the gasket maker off of this pan and also underneath the bottom of my car on the block. I also used a wire wheel to take off every last bit of gasket, and then just used a rag and wiped out the inside very well. So now we're going to add some new gasket maker. If you watch my valve cover video, you'll know I like this Permatex Right Stuff gasket maker. You basically put it on and it's good to go right away, and you can literally expose it to oil without leaking in 5 minutes rather than 24 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and put a bead of this all the way around, and then we'll reinstall it on the car. There's the gasket maker completed. I made sure to go inside of all the holes. I messed up on this one here, but that's okay. I'll admit I went a little heavy on some spots and overall in general, but I like to be safer than having an oil leak. So make sure your pan is flat. Maybe do that before adding the gasket maker. I'm going to go clean off the surface once more under my block, bolt it up, and bolt on my drain line. Then I'll show you guys the result. So here's my oil drain line. This is the oil pan off of Ali's Turbo RSX. And then what I have is a 5/8 JIC extension going to a 10AN 90 degree, which goes on my braided line all the way up to the bottom of the turbo up there. There's a 45 degree going into the turbo to make room for a dump pipe off of my wastegate. I haven't made that yet, but that is where it will go. So the 45 keeps the line nice and far away from the dump tube so it doesn't get hot. Now going under my subframe here, let me see if I can show you guys my oil feed line setup. There is your oil pressure sender for your ECU. So I added a 4-way T going into the block. It's a 1/8 NPT T. Then on the left hand side you could see my oil pressure sensor a little bit. And on the right hand side you could see the oil feed for the turbo. Alright, so we just primed the oil feed line for the turbo, and so we're going to go ahead and do a startup now. And there is a large exhaust leak. One of my welds must be leaking, so disregard the exhaust leak. I'm just doing this to test out the oil system and make sure we're not losing any oil or oil pressure. So here we go. First time it started in 3 weeks probably. Here we go. Alright, so the good news is we found both the exhaust leak and the turbo not spooling problem at the same time. My wastegate for some reason is stuck open or mounted incorrectly because all of the exhaust gas is going straight out the dump tube. So I'm going to take it off, fix it, and reinstall it. Alright, not going to lie, this video has taken a long time to film, so I'm going to go ahead and summarize it now. It's a couple days later since that last clip, and the problem with the exhaust leak was the wastegate. Basically, there was no ring that seals the wastegate plunger, so all the exhaust was getting through that gap and just dumping out this hole here. Now I didn't have any solution and I had to drive my car, so I took a plate of metal the same size as this that you usually use to weld the dump tube to, and I just welded it closed. So right now I'm running no wastegate, but it's okay because as you can see, I'm also running a dual intake naturally aspirated turbo car, so it's all good. Now basically I was able to find some drawings online for a fire ring. This one's not quite done, but it's really close. It just goes in there like that. Then when you install the turbo, it pushes down and applies some preload to the plunger to prevent that exhaust leak that I was experiencing. Now once I install this, the turbo setup will be ready for boost, but it's pretty self-explanatory, just 2 bolts and then a tube off the other side. So that's going to be the end of the turbo installation video for the Civic. Of course, this is not a complete turbo setup. This is just the turbo and downpipe. So that is going to conclude this video. Sorry it took so long to make, but in future videos we're going to be deleting the battery, installing an intercooler, doing some gauges and some tuning. So as always, please like, comment and subscribe. Thanks for watching.